I do want to bring in Daniel Girl, who is the founder and the attorney of NextLaw right here. He is a managing attorney there. So we did want to bring him on to talk more about this. And Daniel, we appreciate you taking the time from your schedule to talk with us.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon.
So I do want to just ask you about the question of bias. I mean, we know that Dr. Hughes is being paid by the prosecution $6,000 to provide her expert testimony. Now, she says this is blind testimony, so she's never met Cassie or, you know, any of the other witnesses right there. But the issue of bias has been raised by Sean Diddy Combs' defense team. You know, talk about what that bias, you know, what the implications are, the significance of it. No doubt they want to paint her as a slanted expert, only sharing specific perspectives.
Absolutely. And that is going to be a major part of his case, I believe, to the degree that the government has seen fit to bring her in as an expert witness at this stage of the trial. What they are hoping to do, even though she hasn't had any direct contact or interviewed any of the witnesses, Cassie Ventura in particular, she's clearly there to testify to her experience with trauma victims. And the government is obviously seeking to align that with the testimony and the evidence that they're presenting from their alleged victims and witnesses. And as a former prosecutor and as now a criminal defense attorney, from the prosecutor's perspective, they want that expert to do exactly that. They want that expert to essentially, without having that direct interviewing or direct contact with their witnesses, be able to speak on their behalf. It was telling to me that earlier in the day, she admitted openly that she has never testified on behalf of a male accused. Anybody accused of sexual allegations. So she is clearly a what I would call a hired gun. Whether or not her testimony itself is biased, it's a very subjective thing. The government's gonna have their work cut out for them to try to argue that she's just there simply as an objective witness. She is there for a reason, and the defense is expected to just jump all over that. And as a result, you see the numerous sidebars that have been going on because bias is such an explosive component in cases like this.
Yeah, and you're absolutely correct. I just wanted to give you know, our viewers a little more audience that she said, yes, that is correct when she was questioned during cross-examination, as you just mentioned, about the fact that she's never taken the stand in defense of a man accused of a sex crime. In fact, she previously testified against R. Kelly back in 2021. She took the stand against the sex cult leader Keith Rainier's case, testifying against him, and then in 2022 testifying against Johnny Depp in his case against Amber Heard. And then later on this year, Daniel, as you know, she's going to take the stand against Harvey Weinstein in his case. When it comes to that pattern, because that is a pattern, you know, how does that play out? Because it does look as though, you know, she only speaks, you know, from a certain perspective. As a defense attorney, are you you know, thinking that this is, you know, really good for your case?
Well, I just think that it's going to come down to how effective for the jury her testimony is. It is possible for an expert witness, even if the jury were to find that she was biased, to still find that her testimony was credible. You know, most of the people that are going to testify in this case are going to have bias to some degree. So bias has to be measured by credibility. And if they find that she is credible, and if the government is able to manage her as a witness, and the ultimate outcome of that is that the jury finds her testimony relevant, or I'm sorry, finds her testimony credible, it can be very damaging to the defense, because clearly she is supporting, and what she is saying is typical behavior, or the typical effects that this sort of activity has on victims. The government is there to say, this is exactly what you heard from our witnesses. This is exactly what you saw in our evidence. So it really is just going to come down to how credible she is, but in front of the jury. And if she's been open so far about her past and what she has specialized in, and there was the PowerPoint earlier that I believe the judge ruled upon its admissibility, where she talked about the presentation that she gave 10 years ago on behalf of domestic violence victims. So it doesn't make any sense to try to pretend that that is not her specialty. Rather, to say and to testify that I'm just telling you that this is what my experience has been with victims and those that have suffered trauma, and this is the outcome. And then the government's going to have to argue to the jury that just because she specializes in one area and has not testified in defense on the defense side does not mean that she's not credible.
So I want to ask you this, Daniel, because it's so interesting. She has been on the stand for hours now. Obviously there was a short recess. Does that indicate anything to you in terms of the length of time a particular witness is on the stand or an expert?
I think in a case like this where we're very early on, it's early in the second week of testimony, and I believe about 6 or 7 witnesses have testified so far. If you compare her testimony to that of Agent Gannon, who I believe started on Friday and then finished today, it's starting to seem as though just time-wise that her testimony is taking up about the same amount of time, more or less, as his, and certainly that's very key testimony. So I think it's very clear that she is a very important part of the government's case at this point.
So I also want to ask you this, because we're around 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. The judge has indicated that typically he would like court to recess between 3 and 4 p.m. Obviously, very flexible. Just a short time ago, we did understand that one of Sean Diddy Combs' former employees is also going to be testifying. He, was actually in the courtroom. He invoked his Fifth Amendment right. He was then granted immunity. So we are expecting to hear from him. When it comes to the rhythm, obviously the judge is very aware and sensitive to, the momentum and the rhythm of testimony and court proceedings. Do you anticipate, them to wrap up however long it takes the psychologist, but then to hold off on bringing a new witness in? Or do you think, like we've seen in previous days, that they will start off on this testimony and then say, you know what, you're adjourned. Court is adjourned. Jury, you're dismissed until tomorrow at 9 a.m.
Well, that's a really good question. I think it's really going to come down to when they finish with that witness. Obviously, every court is different. This is federal court. The judge in that case may be very efficiency conscious. But I would expect that if the testimony of the expert were to wrap up at around 3 o'clock Eastern time, and this other witness is one that would expect their testimony would be expected to last, let's say, 3 hours, which is something that the court can inquire. How long do you expect that your witness is going to be testifying? That they very well may close for the day and then resume tomorrow. If I'm the government, I would prefer to not have my next witness testify only to 15, 20, 30 minutes later recess for the day, because frankly, what I would like to happen is I'd like the jury to leave today with the testimony of that expert witness resonating in their head. If you bring in another witness, it's going to kind of push that back a bit. So if I'm the government, I absolutely want the expert to be the last witness today.
Also,
but there might be scheduling considerations that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, and I want to ask you that too, because this might be a win-win situation, because it almost seems as though, this was kind of a last-minute witness, as, this former employee was granted immunity in court. Could this be a win for the defense, though, as well? So that would give them more time to prepare overnight for their cross-examination of this former employee.
Well, and that's another good point. And again, I was kind of surprised, just as you were, that all of a sudden this witness, came out, and to the degree that this witness may not have been expected to testify, I would imagine the defense would be more than entitled to have time to interview them, especially if they have been granted immunity. If I'm the defense team, I don't want to go into that blind. I want to absolutely be able to prepare as much as possible. Again, I'm not sure what was behind the scenes on that and how much access they did already have to that witness, but as another former, I think, assistant of Combs, we already heard from one of his other assistants, and I think that was very damaging testimony potentially. If I'm the defense, I want to be able to take some time with this one.
So given that, I mean, Dr. Hughes right now is under cross-examination. Everything is so strategic in the courtroom. Nothing is without intent. Do you think that they are going to try and stretch this cross-examination until the judge is like, hey, look, we'd only have 30 minutes to start with this new witness, like we're going to adjourn? Does that enter into the mind of a defense attorney?
It could, I mean, I've been doing this for a while, and I'm familiar with others in my field, and there are times where two very capable and experienced defense attorneys might actually see that differently. For me, I would want to be prepared for that witness. But again, remember, the government's going to put them on first. The defense is going to have a chance to cross-examine. That almost certainly won't it almost certainly won't go to the cross-examination stage today if that witness has taken the stand an hour or less before the court adjourns for the day. So it could be that the defense would want to have that person take the stand immediately, because again, if I'm the government, I want the jury leaving today with their expert witness's testimony ringing in their ears, if I feel as though that witness did a great job.
I mean, it's so fascinating to see how all of this plays out. So much goes into even one decision, which truthfully, in such a high profile case, I'm sure could make it or break it. As someone who has a lot of experience with the law, I mean, when you are in a situation where the stakes are so high, is it easy to get in your own head and to second guess your strategy, to second guess your decisions, or do you got to just, what is the feeling of the attorneys there in the room? I'm sure there's a lot of nerves.
Well, that certainly can happen, and I've done about 60 trials. Certainly nothing near the magnitude of this one, but I do think that the more his defense team is one of the most revered and respected criminal defense teams in the nation, and they know what they're doing. And I think that it's important going into a case to not only on the one hand, yes, be prepared for things, be prepared for the unexpected, but the defense has to have a theory of the case from the beginning, and they're best served by sticking with that and not getting distracted. You have to be open to what happens. There's always things that happen that are unexpected. This might be one of those situations as far as this witness that's coming on is concerned. But they've been through this before, and that's what they're being paid to do. And so I think they've got a theory of the case. Their theory of the case is this is all consensual, that these allegations are made by people who are fueled by jealousy, infidelity, maybe folks that want to make a name for themselves. And celebrity is a two-edged sword. In this case, the defense is I think their theory of the case is that he's being targeted because of his celebrity. So I think they're going to stay the course on that theory.
All right. And speaking of celebrities, we are expecting rapper Kid Cudi to testify. That is also going to be really interesting. Daniel, thank you for taking the time to join us. It's so fascinating to hear from, the legal perspective, because you've been in the courtroom, you've been in situations, such as this. And, just to pick your brain is fascinating. So I appreciate you taking the time to join us here on Live Now from Vox.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I did